On the 16th of May 1943, a force of 19 Royal Air Force Lancasters from 617 Squadron took off from their base in Lincolnshire to take part in what would become one of the most famous precision bombing raids in history. The attack was the brainchild of one man who had persevered for 4 years through technical adversity and official bureaucracy to achieve what was considered to be impossible. This is the story of one of the most famous bombing raids of the Second World War. This is the story of the Dambusters. The story of the Dambusters raid begins not during the Second World War, but much earlier in the early 1930s, when the National Socialist government of Germany rose to power. Almost immediately, they began to rearm the country, much to the alarm of its European neighbors. By 1937, Germany had a formidable war machine at its disposal, and a leader determined to utilize it for his own ambitions. In Britain, a committee was set up to evaluate how Germany could be attacked in the event of hostilities. After all, it was only some 20 years since Germany had thrown the world into the Great War. Central to this plan was the bomber. In the 1930s, proponents of strategic bombing considered that a force of armed aircraft could fight their way across an enemy's frontiers and bomb its industry, thus rendering him unable to prosecute a war. The Air Target Subcommittee identified 45 industrial targets and earmarked them for destruction. The Ruhr Valley was at the heart of Germany's industrial war machine. It was here that hundreds of factories were producing steel for the guns, tanks, ships and munitions that would eventually feed Hitler's Third Reich. Water was an essential element for the production of steel. It took on average 100 tons of water to produce 1 ton of steel. The water was supplied to the Ruhr Valley by means of enormous dams located to the east of the industrial area. Of the many dams in Germany, air staff singled out 6 for possible attack. The 3 largest were chosen as main targets: the Möhne, Ada, and Sarpe. In total, they contained 3/4 of the water on which the Ruhr relied for its steel production. If somehow these dams could be destroyed, then it was reasoned that the production of the Third Reich would suffer a severe blow and reduce their capacity to wage war effectively. Extensive flooding would create widespread damage, as well as depriving hydroelectric plants and local communities of their water supplies. However, there was one serious difficulty to overcome. Dams are very formidable structures, solid, strong, and very large. The planners paused. Could they be destroyed? A major problem for RAF Bomber Command in attacking such targets was bomb size. At the outbreak of war in September 1939, the standard weapon carried by bombers, such as the Wellington, was the 500-pound general-purpose bomb. All agreed that even if hundreds of these were dropped on a target as huge as a dam, it would barely damage it. It seemed an insurmountable problem, but by the spring of 1940, one man thought he might have an answer. A brilliant aeronautical designer named Barnes Wallis had been working on his own ways of shortening the war. Wallis worked for the Vickers Armstrong Aircraft Company and was already well established as one of Britain's chief aircraft engineers. He had a string of successful designs to his credit, including the Wellington bomber, which had been in RAF frontline service since 1938. This outstanding aircraft utilized a unique structure known as geodetics. Basically, comprising an interlacing latticework of aluminium, it was both light and strong. It was an aircraft able to absorb amazing amounts of damage and still get its crews safely home. In private, Wallis had been studying ways to deprive Germany of its sources of natural power, so vital to modern industrial production. Through his exhaustive research, he had also identified the dams as important targets. From late 1939, he set himself the personal task of finding out whether these structures could be destroyed. His studies unearthed much about Germany's water usage. The Ruhr Valley dams owed their existence to the region's susceptibility to flooding from heavy spring and autumn rainfall. Dams are usually constructed across a flood valley. Over time, rainfall fills the valley to form a reservoir. The water can then be drawn off to supply hydroelectric plants and local towns, whilst controlling the unexpected flooding problem and ensuring vast amounts of water are available to heavy industries and domestic properties during dry periods. The Ruhr Valley dams consisted of two main types. Firstly, a gravity dam, a design that is effectively a tapering stone wall, triangular in section, with the widest points being at the base, to withstand the immense water pressure which acts against it. Some gravity dams are also curved to resist the tendency for water to try and push the structure downstream. They are anchored to the valley at each end and are held in place by their sheer weight. The Mörner and Eder dams are fine examples of this particular design. To illustrate the size, this scale computer model shows a person standing on the crest of the Mörner Dam, which itself is over a quarter of a mile wide. Secondly is the shallower earth type, which is a totally different design to the gravity dam. It comprises a central concrete core, with each side being built up of sloping banks of earth and rubble. These pose different problems for a potential attacker, since the earth banks effectively shield the watertight core from a bomb. The only earth dam chosen by the air staff was the Sorpe, shown here, an immense structure over 6 times thicker at its base than the Mörner. These 3 dams would form the heart of any proposed attack. Up to this point, several ideas have been put forward to destroy the dams. One of the first considered was to airdrop a self-powered skimmer containing explosives, which would propel itself to the dam wall, sinking upon contact. A fuse would detonate the explosives at a set depth. This was rejected because the Germans had installed floating defensive booms across the reservoir in anticipation of such an attack. Another proposal was to drop special torpedoes, which was also rejected because the booms supported thick steel nets which would block their passage. Even a commando raid by parachute to apply demolition charges to vital parts of the structure was considered. However, due to the potential high casualty rate to the attacking force, this plan was shelved. Wallace, however, had a more viable proposition for the air planners. Wallace's idea was more conventional, if less heroic. He proposed dropping a 10-ton bomb from 40,000 feet. On descent, the angled tail fins would start it rotating, and as it entered the Earth at the speed of sound, the spin would help the bomb to penetrate the Earth in a corkscrew motion. The Air Ministry greeted the idea with skepticism. They argued that to develop a bomber through its design, testing, and introduction to service phases had taken an average of 6 years. Furthermore, Britain, it was claimed, did not have the capacity or the space in existing aircraft production to build it. After a year, Wallace's big bomb concept and its parent aircraft were cancelled. Wallace returned to the drawing board, still considering his ideas to be sound. He abandoned large bomb development for the moment, deciding to concentrate on accuracy issues rather than size. This, he hoped, would open up new avenues of possibility. Wallace's work had, however, aroused interest in other circles. His persistence that German dams were worth investigating led Wallace to seek the assistance of the Road Research Laboratory at Harmondsworth. Since 1940, engineers, under the direction of Dr. William Glanville, had been conducting tests upon scale models. They had been trying to discover how much charge would be necessary to breach the Mörner Dam. After early disappointments, they made a breakthrough. It was discovered that if a charge was detonated in water instead of air, the shock waves from the explosion would be applied against the dam wall for longer than the explosion itself, due simply to water being much denser than air. It was simple physics. With this in mind, Wallace wondered whether a form of depth charge could be used. Although a submerged detonation was more efficient than air, another problem presented itself. The water between the dam and the explosion was absorbing much of the generated pressure. To destroy a dam with this method still required a weight of explosive far in excess of the carrying capacity of any available aircraft. In early 1942, the desperately needed breakthrough was made. If the charge was placed hard against the dam wall, the shock waves would be focused and amplified instead of absorbed, thus cracking the masonry. The enormous weight of water which had been blasted away from the dam face in the initial explosion would then return once the initial shock waves had dissipated and breach it. His next experiment would be on a much grander scale. The Birmingham City Corporation allowed the test team to conduct experiments at the disused Nantygrow Dam in Wales. This structure was 1/5 the size of the Myrna. From Dr. Glanville's tests on scale models, Wallace knew that 279 pounds of explosive would be required to make a breach. This first test, carried out in early 1942, shows the result of a non-contact explosion. The water between the explosion and the dam wall absorbs the pressure shock waves, cancelling out the pressure. For the next test, the team planned to carry out a contact detonation. Glanville was able to acquire a 500-pound anti-submarine mine. It was lowered into position against the face of the dam, while observers, including Barnes-Wallis, retired to a safe distance. At 5 o'clock on July the 24th, the mine was detonated. The result was conclusive. Wallace was elated. Wallace realized that a contact detonation was the key to destroying the dams. They calculated that the weight of explosive needed to breach the Myrna was 6,500 pounds, well within the carrying capacity of Bomber Command's new aircraft, the Avro Lancaster, now coming into service. But could the RAF deliver a weapon to within a few feet of the target? A report published in 1941 did not make encouraging reading. It estimated that only 1 in 10 bombers were getting within 5 miles of their target. In regions close to the German frontier, aircraft were even bombing the wrong country as a result of poor navigation and bomb aiming equipment. Clearly, high-level bombing had not yet come of age. Wallace would have to find a new method of delivering his weapon, one which had to be dropped with uncompromising accuracy. The question was how.
Nelson used the one bounce which you will get from a spherical cannonball to increase the range of his cannon, because he would fire down at the water and the cannonball would bounce and hit a ship further away. But I discovered that if you rotate it so that the underside of the rotation is going in the same direction as the bomb, you can get a long run. I've actually run a ball 2¼ miles in the open sea off the coast of Norfolk.